The fullness of the Ten Commandments is immense, and there's just so much to be learned there. But before we get to that, today is a holiday. It's actually a holiday in ancient Israel. It is not a holiday that's mentioned in the Torah, but it is implied by the Torah that we're going to measure, the years in various ways. And so there's a birthday of the year itself. That would be Rosh Hashanah. There's another beginning of the year at Passover, because when we left Egypt, we were told this would be the beginning of the year for you, the first of months. And there is also today, the 15th of the Hebrew month of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, is a holiday, and it is the birthday of the trees. It is the moment when the sap begins to rise in the trees, and we can say that the trees have their birthday. And we would commemorate it in ancient times and today by enjoying a fruit that we have not yet had this year. And that enables us to make a blessing over the fruit and the shechechianu, which I'll do it in English in a moment. So we have here a pomegranate. I'm very excited about this. Yesterday, I made the bracha, and so I made a post today on Facebook of it over a loquat, which actually grows in our backyard. So I've already had a loquat for the first time this year, but I have not yet had a pomegranate. And I'm sure I have not had one even since Rosh Hashanah. So this is my pomegranate. And I confess, I myself have never cut a pomegranate before. So I'm hoping I do this right on my cutting board. I've heard you want to take off that top. And then go in through there. Make a nice slice through there. All right. And we have this beautiful fruit here. And I'm going to say first the blessing over any fruit. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'etz. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who makes the fruit of the tree. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechechianu v'hikimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us life and sustained us and enabled us to reach this moment. Mm. 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 And what I'm thinking about is not just how good it tastes, but everything that went into bringing that sweetness and fullness to me. All the people who participated in growing that fruit and bringing it here, all the water that went up from the ocean into the clouds, came down into the land, into the earth, the incredible living process of it entering the earth, joining the nutrients, coming up in a tree that was made because some years ago, some animal ate that fruit, and it passed through the animal, and it left it in a new place, and the seed became a tree. I mean, it is truly miraculous, and it is an opportunity to bond and to understand that pleasure that I'm receiving was given to me by my Creator. Please look at today's post on Facebook. I wrote a little bit more about it, but in short, if we just, our sages would teach, or the Kabbalists would teach, that Tu B'Shvat is an opportunity to help rectify the sin of Adam and Eve, right? And you'll recall they ate the forbidden fruit. They had only 2 commandments in the garden. Enjoy all the fruit. Don't eat one fruit. That's it. But those commandments represent all of the positive and negative commandments that would eventually be given at Mount Sinai, which we're going to be talking about today when we talk about the 10 commandments. The positive commandments, what you shall do, for instance, tithing. The negative commandments, what you shall not do, for example, don't steal. And don't steal includes many things, like, for instance, if you eat something that was given to you by God, and everything was given to us by God, and you don't make a blessing, it's considered theft because we did not appreciate where that came from. Right? So every time we make a blessing, it's this opportunity to join the Creator. Adam and Eve, what they fail to realize is the one that they're not supposed to eat is what actually really made all the rest of it theirs, right? Because by saying, I'm not going to eat that one, they're obeying the will of the Creator, they're plugging into the will of the Creator, and they're plugging into that divine flow. Rabbi Aaron, David Aaron, good friend of ours, he's been on the show. He likes to say that, the way that God gives us everything is similar to the way that a mother gives milk to a baby, right? As much as the baby wants that milk and wants to grow and is greedy and hungry, yeah, give me, want that milk. As much as the baby wants the milk, the mother wants to give the milk to the baby. And in fact, when the baby sucks, it stimulates the mother to create that milk and to give that milk.
And I would just add that if the baby's, the mother literally physically needs the baby to drink the milk, or it becomes very uncomfortable. So maybe there's an element of that too, with God giving to us, that there's a negativity to not giving.
Yeah, or a missed opportunity, right? God wants to give us that fullness. And if we don't take it, I think it's painful to God. I think it's devastating to God, right? And taking it without making the bracha is like not taking it, right? That's when they ate of the one they weren't supposed to do, we're sort of obviating the whole purpose of what the giving is all about, right? So this is a day to eat a fruit that you haven't eaten before this year, to make that blessing, and then make the Shehechianu blessing, and then take that moment to plug into that divine flow. It is a wonderful opportunity, and it is a real pleasure, right? You can just get the pleasure of the sweetness of the fruit. That's nice. But if you plug into everything that went into giving you that fruit and all the gift of God, that brought that fruit to you, and all the people and the earth and the water and the land and the animals and everything that was involved, that's a big pleasure, a really big pleasure. Okay, a little bit more business before we get to the 10 Commandments. I mentioned this on our live show yesterday. Facebook to overhaul news feed. Facebook is changing its algorithms once again. Most of you have probably found us through Facebook. Be sure to turn on notifications at Accidental Talmudist so that our live shows pop up in your feed, so that it shows up. It's not enough to like the page. You have to turn on notifications. This is a big deal for nonprofits like us because we get treated like businesses, and now businesses are getting demoted in favor of the more personal experience of Facebook, which is a good thing. But if you want to be sure to see Accidental Talmudist, make sure to turn on notifications. Okay. Also, I consider you our inner circle, our innermost circle, our class. We are going to be doing a big fundraiser, our major fundraiser of 2018. And that's going to happen on February 20th. And as part of that, we need volunteers to sort of join our virtual call center. Right? So we're going to basically call everybody who's ever donated. And thank God we have a nice community of people who enable Accidental Talmudist to do its work. And in the fundraiser is going to be 24 hours. And so during that 24-hour period, we need to call everybody and make sure that everybody knows that we're doing it and that they have an opportunity to participate in this enormous mitzvah. It's going to be a big party, and we're going to have people here in LA making the calls. But we don't want to limit it just to our local environment, because Accidental Talmudist has always been a big virtual community. So if you are interested in just volunteering, you can do it a few hours. We'll have a Zoom room like this, not a webinar, which is a little bit more one way, but a fully integrated Zoom room where you'll be live with us, and you'll be making you'll get a call sheet of as many as you want. 10, 20 people to call who are already connected to Accidental Talmudist. They'll be happy to receive the call and letting them know that the fundraiser is on that day and that they can participate. So if you want to volunteer to be in our virtual control room and party center, please let us know. You can just mention it right now in the comments that you'd like to volunteer. Dan is watching it, our assistant Dan, and if he sees your name, he'll reach out to you. And probably already have your email address because you're in this room, so we should have your email address, but he'll double check that to make sure we can get a hold of you. And that'll happen on Tuesday, February 20th. I see Irene Kent. You would love to help. God bless you. All right. Who else is going to join Irene? Who else is going to be a volunteer with us on February 20th? Let us know. Okay. And the Facebook Live audience, same for you. You guys are watching our Facebook Live. Put it in the comments that you'd like to help, and we will reach out to you. Make sure we have your email. The best way is just to send a direct message to Accidental Talmudist, and then we will get back to you on how you can join us as a volunteer on February 20th. Okay. I think that's all the business that I need to do. Let's talk about the 10 Commandments. Okay. We're learning the 10 Commandments today because we are in the Torah portion, Yisro or Yitro, depending on how you pronounce it, or in English, Jethro, right? So Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. And it's interesting that the name of the Torah portion that includes the 10 Commandments, it's actually given twice in the Torah, now when it happens, and then toward the end in the book of Deuteronomy when there's a kind of recap of everything that we did when we wandered in the desert during the final sermon of Moses. That's what the book of Deuteronomy is. But here in the first version of the 10 Commandments, it's in Torah portion Yitro, right? And so Yitro was not Jewish. So it's very interesting that the 10 Commandments are given within a Torah portion that is named after a non-Jew who was in fact a priest of Midian, I think. So that is to tell you that the 10 Commandments have universal importance. It doesn't mean that they actually apply to all people. As we'll see, one of the commandments in the 10 Commandments is about Shabbat, keeping Shabbat. Keeping Shabbat is a commandment for the Jews. But all of these commandments have implication and application to all people, as we shall see. So let's set the stage. The 10 Commandments, right? It wasn't given like 2 tablets appeared on top of the tent of meeting and there they were. The giving of the 10 Commandments was the most dramatic moment in the history of mankind. And that's saying a lot because we had just emerged from Egypt with an enormous manifestation of 10 plagues, which is 10 miracles, 10 interventions by the Holy One in the world, pushing nature aside and bringing the beasts and the locusts and the hail, etc. And then an even bigger manifestation as we left Egypt and the Red Sea was parted and we walked through on dry land, and there was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night that came between us and the Egyptians and then eventually would guide us into the desert. But here, as we, the entire people, the children of Israel, and all who sort of accompanied us out of Egypt, it wasn't just Jews who left Egypt. There was a mixed multitude. A lot of people were smart enough to say, these Jews seem to be on the right side of history. I'm going to throw in my lot with them. And so it's a huge number of people gathered around Mount Sinai, which is a humble mountain. It's not Mount Everest. It's a little mountain in the desert, but it was the place chosen for this event in history when God revealed God's self in an overt manner. And the people who were there witnessed that this whole mountain began to shake violently. That's what the Torah says, violently. If you've ever been in an earthquake, and I have here in Los Angeles, and I fear being in another one, you realize that what you think is real and what you take as a given can disappear in an instant. For instance, we take it as a given that the earth that we walk on is solid. When there's an earthquake, you realize it can be like a liquid. And the earth moves literally like a wave. A wave passes through the earth. That whole mountain was quaking like jello. And there was a rumbling, an enormous rumbling. And there was the sound of the shofar growing ever louder. It's a big sound in a small room, like I'm in here. Sorry, my rug got and close to a microphone, but as nothing compared to the sound that was there that day. Enormous, piercing shofar horn blast that just went through everybody's body. And it just got louder and louder and louder. And people knew that the Lord was going to speak to them. And since there was already this enormous manifestation, they thought, well, when he actually speaks to us, I mean, we're just going to split in two. But at the moment that the 10 Commandments were given, it all went silent. And it was not a local silence. Our sages teach that the entire world went silent. And the entire world was balanced on what happened next. If the Jews would accept this Torah and this relationship with God, the world would continue. And if they did not, if they said it was too much for us, it's not for us, then the world would perish in that instant. And this is to say that the Jews were there as a kind of representative for all mankind. Because if we're either going to have this relationship with God, or there's not going to be a world to have a relationship in. And of course, the world is still here. So the covenant took hold. The people accepted for themselves and for their descendants for all time. And what did they accept? What was this covenant? Yes?
Did you change something after you blew the shofar? Because the volume went down.
It did?
Yeah.
I don't know. I will check. Just double checking our sound settings. Maybe the recording. All right. I'm just gonna. Is it okay now, Nina? Not fixed? I wonder if I blew the microphone somehow. All right, I'm going to switch microphones. I'm going to switch microphones. Okay, can you hear me now? All good? I just want to check one more thing. Did I really blow the microphone? What about now? No good? Did I blow this microphone? I didn't know you could do that. Say it again?
Turn on Facebook Live.
Okay. All right, to our Facebook Live audience, this is the end of the Facebook Live broadcast. We hope to see you next week in the class. Of course, we'll do our regular Facebook Live show on Tuesday, but the class is not really a Facebook Live event. So we hope to see you in the class. You can register using the link in the description. Okay. Boom. Okay. So, can't believe I blew the mic with the shofar. Okay, that's how powerful it was. Right. So, this was the moment. We're all still here, so the moment took hold. This covenant took hold. Now, what actually happened? Let's look at these commandments one by one. Let me share my screen here. Share screen. Okay. I believe you guys can see the Hebrew writing there. Yes? Okay. All right. So, God spoke all these words, saying, I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. Now, most people will point to, I, the Lord, am your God, and ask the question, is that a commandment? And the answer is yes. That is a commandment. It doesn't sound like a commandment. It sounds like a statement of fact that introduces the rest of the commandments and, as it were, establishes God's authority for giving these commandments. But it is, in fact, a positive commandment. It is a commandment to know God, to understand that God spoke to us and speaks to us. And I will add that it is an opportunity. You know, anytime that you read in the Torah, and this is right at the top of the Ten Commandments, so it's an important opportunity and it's an important experience to have. When you read words in the Torah that are literally God speaking, I just said, I am the Lord your God. How can I even say those words? How is it possible for me to utter words like that, to put myself in the place of God and to speak God's words? Isn't it just the height of presumptuousness? Isn't it just the most horribly arrogant thing that a person ever did? To say, I am the Lord your God, to speak the words, to quote God? And the answer is, no, it is not the most arrogant thing. It's something we're commanded to do, right? Why? Because every person is a soul, right? We don't have souls. I say this so often. We are souls. And what is a soul? A soul is a manifestation of God in this world. Every one of you and me and everyone you see, every human is a soul walking around, and that person is an expression of God. And it is because we forget where we came from and who we really are that we lose that connection and we lose sight of that ability, of that, who we really are. In the same way that a character in our dream, when you have a dream, there's characters in your dream. All of those characters, good people, bad people, nasty people, wonderful people, are you. They don't have any existence that's separate from you. So each of us is living a life, a human life, on behalf of God. And when we speak God's words, when we say, I am the Lord your God, it's an opportunity to remember who we are. Obviously, it doesn't give us rights to, wield power over others, because everyone is equally a soul with that same connection. But it is a channel and an opportunity to remember who you are, and an important one. And so every time we speak God's words, we can do that. And God gave us that opportunity from the beginning. Now, the second commandment, you shall have no other gods beside me, right? And you shall not make a graven image of those gods. So it's a little bit, which you shall have no other gods beside me. Sometimes it's part of the first commandment, sometimes part of the second, depending on how people are reckoning it. But the idea is the same. There is only one God. It is a commandment to know God, to remember our connection with God, and to not ascribe godlike power to anything or anyone else. There is nothing but God in this world. And so to create a deity, to have an idol, to make a little statue and invest it with power, that's idolatry. In Hebrew, avodah zarah. And it's right at the top of the worst things that we can do. We do not do that because it's such an insult to God. And God tells us straight off, I, speaking in God, am a jealous God. Isn't that amazing that the most powerful being in the universe would say to us, his little creatures, I'm a jealous God? I mean, don't we look at people who admit that they're jealous, or people who are jealous, who have jealousy as a big part of their character? Don't we consider that a weakness, a lack of confidence? So this is an amazing expression of humility by the Holy One. For the Holy One to say, I'm a jealous God. I want your love. I want you to pay attention to me. I don't want you to dilute that love in any way, especially by mistakenly applying it to some powerless entity that you're elevating to a deity. For God to say that is just, it's kind of stepping down to our level for our sake, putting it in terms that we can understand, because God loves us so much. Now, these first two commandments, I am the Lord your God, and you won't have any other gods, and don't do anything to have other gods, are the ones that are in the direct voice, I, you, God speaking to us. And our sages teach that what the people actually heard when the voice of God came out, and it was a quiet voice, but it was a voice that penetrated everyone, like every single cell in your body, was completely subsumed and nullified before the Holy One in that moment. And when God speaks, God has no need to use words. God can communicate, and you got the whole message, right? So in the first utterance, the first of the first utterance, Anohi, I am Lord your God, the first aleph of that, everyone got that he is God and heard all the 10 commandments all at once and understood it. But to sort of, Nina and I always say, as writers, if you say a thing once, you haven't said it at all, because people forget so easily. Then God began to say it in words so that it would be set down and remembered forever by everybody who wasn't necessarily there that day. But it was too much. He managed to get through the first 2 commandments, and the people were like, we're splitting in half. It's too overwhelming. We can't do it. God and Moses understood that. And so the next 8 commandments were dictated to God and repeated to the people. Hearing the direct voice of God was just too strong. And that's why, once we get into the third command, the third commandment is that you will not take God's name in vain. So now he's not saying you will not take my name in vain. It's you will not take God's name in vain. So now it's Moses speaking, taking dictation from God, but being a relay to the people because God's voice was just too overwhelming. So that's why the first 2 commandments are in the first person. And then from then on, we're talking about God, but we understand that this was dictated directly to Moses. Moses is passing it along to us. Okay, the third commandment is about vain oaths. Now, it's important to understand the structure of the 10 commandments. We often see the 10 commandments as 2 tablets, right? 5 and 5. So the first 5 commandments are humans' obligations between us and God. And the second 5 are about our obligations between us and other people. That's the structure. So we're still on the first tablet. Third commandment, don't make vain oaths, right? Don't take God's name in vain. Why? Because when you just utter God's name casually, and if you think about the culture, and just out of respect, I don't even want to say it. There's a euphemism, which is "gosh darn it," right? And that phrase stands in for another phrase, which is definitely taking the Lord's name in vain. And it's just used all the time by people who just say, well, this is what I want to do, and I'm just going to do it. And there's this casualness of taking God's name in vain like that. And God hates that casualness, and we need to learn to hate it too. So much of what goes on in Judaism, it starts in the 10 Commandments, extends to what our sages teach, is about refining our language, because everything exists in language. And if we're casual with our words, we're casual with our deeds, and we start living in a godless world. So if we're not careful with how we utter God's name, we come to be living in a godless world. And he's telling us, take my name very seriously, because names matter, right? And so, if I'm talking to my beloved and I say, honey, blah, 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 or if I say, Nina, blah, 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 these are different statements, right? We establish a different relationship at the beginning of the sentence by whether what name we use, how we use that name, what is the tone, etc. So anytime we invoke God's name, it's a big deal, and we do it with respect. And God has many names. So depending on what name we're using in a conversation and in an utterance and in a blessing, it's a kind of different aspect of God, a different aspect of God's personality that we are invoking at that moment. And we do so with great care. And that's why you'll notice that the 4-letter name, which is maybe the most important name in the Torah of God, we never even say it. We've lost the ability to know how to pronounce it. And instead of, we don't even spell it out with the proper letters, right? So the first letter is Yud and the second letter is Hey, but when we spell it out, we would say Yud K Vav K. And it's kind of a way to not say it exactly, to give it greater respect. That's how we spell it. And when we pronounce it, we use a different word, which means Lord, as in my master. Here I am teaching God's name, so I can say Adonai. But that, again, is just standing in for God's actual name. And we don't even say the stand-in unless we're teaching directly in a Torah class or praying or reading the Torah. So it's that kind of respect. And it's all about refining our speech. That lesson applies beyond God's name. It's about saying we want to be refined people. And so, when I became a dad, I noticed, I can't curse. I can't curse around my kids. I'm going to teach them to curse. And it really changed me. I mean, I don't think I was a person who cursed a lot before, but I certainly would curse now and then. And then I pretty much stopped cursing. And I realized that it made my life better. Refining your speech, taking curses out of it. Then when a curse comes in, it's a big word. It has great, great meaning. Better, it should never be uttered. But if it is uttered, it creates a change in the environment. If they're uttered a lot loosely, it doesn't bring a change. It just demotes the quality of your life at all times. It's something to be taken seriously. Fourth commandment, Shabbos. Now, this is interesting because hold on. Sorry, I had a wrinkle in the rug. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not a religious person, but I keep the 10 Commandments. As we've seen, even these first 3 that we've already done, a lot of people violate those all the time. They don't take note of God, so they live in a godless world. They'll do things that are idolatrous without thinking about it, because idolatry doesn't just mean you bow before an idol, but even casually doing a practice that is associated with idolatry can be idolatrous. And the ways we use money can sometimes edge into that. Now we get to Shabbos. How many people are keeping Shabbos? Not that many, right? This is a real big challenge. And Shabbos is a commandment for the Jews. And it's in many ways the most important commandment because it keeps God in our lives constantly. It's either is Shabbat, or we're moving out of Shabbat, or we're moving towards Shabbat, or we're preparing for Shabbat. It keeps that whole life on a constant weekly cycle that we're always aware of. We're aware that Shabbat begins at a different time every week as we move from winter to summer and summer back to winter. In summer, Shabbat begins very late on Friday night, and winter begins very early on Friday evening. And it just keeps us plugged into the divine flow. And by extension, what is Shabbat? It's that God stopped creating the world. And so it brings us right back to creation, makes everything, makes us aware that we live in God's creation and that God stopped. And so we're going to stop. In the 2 versions of the 10 Commandments here in Exodus, it says, remember the Sabbath day. And then when it's repeated in Deuteronomy, it says, observe the Sabbath day or guard the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day refers to the positive aspects of what we need to do to honor Shabbat. Nina will light candles, so will our daughter on Friday afternoon before sunset. I'll make a kiddush, she'll make the blessing over the wine. Well, Nina makes challah, she makes a beautiful dinner. These are all ways that we remember the Sabbath. We do things to mark the Sabbath. And then guard it or observe it is what we don't do, meaning we don't do work, right? We turn off our screens, we don't engage in business, we don't carry outside of a boundary. I mean, there's just many things that we don't do to honor the Sabbath. And again, just like we talked about the fruits of Tu B'Shvat, and Adam and Eve, there's the positive commandments, what you do and what you don't do. And with both our actions and our restraint, we connect with God and honor God. And then the 5th commandment is very interesting. And then after this, I'll pause, take some questions before we do the second set. But the 5th commandment is the last commandment on the first tablet. Right? So as I mentioned, the first tablet is about our responsibilities to God. right? And the second tablet is about our responsibilities to other people. If the first tablet is about our responsibilities to God, then why is the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother? It would seem to be a commandment toward other people. I'd like to hear what people have to say about this before I go on and answer. So first of all, you can answer in the chat. And does anyone on the panel want to offer an answer? Barbara, I see you raising your hand. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Hi, I had heard that in honoring your parents, you're honoring your creators, and then honoring the greater creator. And that's kind of my take.
For sure. For sure. And we certainly have a tradition that when a man and woman create a child, they're in a partnership right there at the outset with God. Exactly. Not to use language loosely, but it's a threesome, as it were. And it is the man, the woman, and God who are participating in creating that child. And so one of the reasons that honoring mom and dad is honoring God is because they all together created us. Absolutely. So we're honoring our creators is part of honoring the creator. That is a good reason. Anybody else? I'm looking over here. Libby says, I've struggled with the honor your father and mother. What does this look like? What does the honor look like? Does it mean not to dishonor them? See, that's excellent, Libby, because this is the tough question, right? What does it mean to honor our parents? Some of us are blessed with the most giving, loving, lovely people. It's easy to be around them. If they weren't our parents, we'd be friends with them. Other times it's not so easy. Not everybody has that great relationship with mom and dad. My mother was never even blessed to know her father because he died in the Holocaust before she was even born. He never met his daughter. How would she honor her father, right? You can honor the memory of someone, and that's a good thing to do, and it's an important thing to do. But what about when it's really challenging? You know, when that relationship is challenged, some people, God forbid, were parented by awful people, and then they have to struggle to obey this commandment. And it's especially in light of that situation, or when our parents get a lot older and it becomes more difficult to take care of them, that God is reminding us that chain, right, that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, is parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, and eventually to the first person created by God. And particularly at Mount Sinai, right, when God revealed God's self to everybody, the link back to Mount Sinai is through our parents. And I think that what's being told to us here, subtly and overtly, is that we need to honor our parents because we are respecting them and thanking them for what they give us, not just that they gave us life and fed us, etc., but what they taught us. God willing, they taught us by example. Sometimes they teach us by negative example. But as soon as you plug into that chain of transmission, you're also taking on the responsibility to become a parent yourself. Now, not everyone is going to be blessed to be a parent. It doesn't happen for everybody, and that's okay. Everybody has a different role to play. But if possible, we should try to be a parent, right? And just making that effort, to get into a couple and to have a child, that is part of taking on. It's also another commandment, be fruitful and multiply. But specifically here, we're talking about joining that chain of transmission, joining that chain that links us all the way back to Sinai and the giving of the Ten Commandments, beyond that to the beginning of creation, and joining that chain that exists in this world. In the upper world, the world of souls, where we know and feel constantly our connection to the Holy One, there's no time, right? There's not this sense that we have in this world. I was talking with my kids about this morning, driving to school. Abraham Lincoln liked to tell the story of an ancient, powerful emperor who realized that everything was changing all the time. And he said, what is true? What will always be true? He gathered the wisest men in the world and said, tell me one thing that will always be true. And they discussed and argued and conferred for a month. And at the end, they came back to him and they said, Your Majesty, there is only one thing that will be forever true. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. It just keeps changing. The nature of the physical world is that it keeps changing. Things are born and they die. Things are powerful and then they're not powerful. Things are lofty and then they're not lofty. Things blossom and then they rot. Everything will keep changing in this world. But the world itself, which is an expression of the divine, that is the eternal. That is the eternity. And when we participate in that by joining that chain of transmission, then we honor its source. And that's why honoring our parents is such an important commandment. And it is deemed worthy by God of being on that first tablet, first 5, is a way to honor God by honoring our parents. Right? Especially those of us who are getting older and who have older parents. It's so important. And I try to call my dad every day. I do it when I drive. If my mom did not have dementia, I would call her every day, and I really miss calling her and speaking with her and sharing what's going on. So honor your parents, even if it's tough. All right. It's taken a while to do the first 5 commandments, and I'm wondering if we'll do the other 5 today. First, let me look at some questions here in the chat. I want to take some questions. Louis Loomis says, I read that the 3rd commandment means do not use the name of God, do not carry the name of God as an excuse to abuse or even murder others. Some people will kill others in the name of God, which is to soil God's name and authority. Example, so many people turn from God because they think godly people use God in order to abuse and even murder others. 9/11 was such an example. Yes, I mean, listen, this is why I'm the accidental Talmudist, right? The Talmud is the unbroken tradition passed from teacher to student and from parent to child since Sinai of the other half of the Torah. So the Torah was given in 2 parts, equal to each other, both important. The written Torah, right, which is this document that is unchanged since all that time, where it's all set down, the code, as it were. And the oral teaching. That's what the Talmud is. It's the oral teaching. And the purpose of the oral teaching is to help us understand in every generation how to apply the written teaching. Some of the oral laws were given at Sinai, and we wouldn't understand what they were if they weren't given. Like it says, a man is going to bind these words on his arm, and it'll be a symbol before his eyes. That's tefillin. But all it says is a sign on your arm and a symbol before your eyes. And that could be anything. God forbid, it could be a tattoo. Tattoos are prohibited, but if we didn't know what this was, we wouldn't know how to do it. So tefillin is something that was given back at Sinai. Other aspects of the oral law are more about process and procedure. In other words, technology is going to change, kingdoms are going to change, locations are going to change. God knew that eventually there would be ships, and there would be a new world, there would be Columbus, there would be other countries, eventually there would be airplanes, and all kinds of questions that would come up that were not even imagined back then would need to be answered so that we would know how to follow God's law, how to fulfill his will in those new situations. So we would need a procedure so that we could evaluate, right? If somebody comes up through their own thinking that the way I'm going to honor God is to go kill a bunch of innocent people, well, they're mistaken. They're a terrorist. They're wrong. And if you were part of this deliberation process, you know you were wrong. It's only when people kind of take it on themselves to go do a really exciting thing that they can become an evil murderer. And so part of that process is so important. I have this article here on today's paper. It's very interesting. Builders Reimagine the Future. So this article is about the fact that driverless cars are coming. And eventually there's going to be a lot of them, right? And when there's a lot of driverless cars just kind of circulating in the city all the time, and just like you call an Uber or a Lyft, you just call it with your phone, it shows up in a moment, takes you wherever you need to be. Well, people are just not going to need to own cars. And so all these buildings with enormous parking lots are going to have a whole bunch of wasted space. And so builders are now, in the architectural rendering of the building saying that, well, for the next, 10 or 20 years, this will be a parking lot. But then that space is going to get converted to residential or to office or to another kind of use. And they call this future proofing, right? This is a hot term in building and architecture now in 2018, future proofing. Well, the Torah was the original future-proofed code, the original future-proofed law book. And so God made it future-proof because there's going to be a process by which the questions that will come up in the future can be evaluated. We'll talk more about that later. But all of these laws are eternal. There's nothing in the Ten Commandments that won't work in the future, as long as we understand how the system works. Okay. Let's see. Warren, I believe in Hashem. Our world was created by God. Why did Hashem create the world? I understand we don't have to know. It's not my business, but in the whole universe, we can't find anything but rock and darkness. I hope he didn't create us to prove something. On the other hand, I'm glad I'm here. Thanks, a great exposition. I will say this is how I live my life, or how I aspire to live my life. And this is just very consistent. It's not mine. I didn't make this up. This is very consistent with Jewish teaching. That God created a physical world so that he would be able to find a home in the physical world. Right? If you imagine the spiritual world, and I think you can sort of start to get a sense of it, when you close your eyes. What do you see when you close your eyes? It's not black, right? When I close my eyes, I see kind of dim phosphorescence, like there's just lots of flowing stuff, almost like if you just imagine water being churned in a tidal pool. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff there, and it's the farthest thing from static. It's just constantly flowing and changing. And the sort of higher spiritual world is like that. It's a world of energy. This world is static. Now, we just said that everything changes in this world, but from moment to moment, this pen remains a pen. And this journal remains a journal. It has solidness. And as Einstein told us, there's a tremendous amount of energy in the atoms of that book. We could free the atoms of just this little book, could power probably a whole city for a long time. Having a place that's fixed means that it's super, super concentrated. And so there's a possibility for God to realize certain aspects of God's will that are possible in a physical world and that are not possible in a spiritual world. The spiritual world is a different kind of place. So God made a physical world so that the things that are only possible in the physical world could happen. One of the things that's only possible in the physical world is that there would be beings who live their lives independent, thinking that they're just doing their thing, and they can choose to join and bond with the Creator. They can choose to be good to each other. They can choose to make moments of exceptional beauty and generosity and connection. And just like we have children and we can't make them love us and we can't make them be generous to others and we can't make them be sweet to another person, but when they do, when they choose to be sweet to us and when they choose to be sweet to a stranger and when they say, look at that homeless person, it's so sad, let's go bring some food over to them, and our hearts pound with pride that they've developed that sweetness and And thank God we were able to give them an opportunity and a life and an education and whatever else went into it. But then, we got them to the sort of the stage of life, as it were, and then they had to play their part. And when they play their part with goodness, it fills us with joy. And so God is filled with joy. God tells us in the Torah that God is an emotional being. In the Ten Commandments, he just told us he is jealous. He doesn't want us to misapply our worship and our love. And likewise, he gets pleasure. And he tells us that certain actions that we do give him pleasure. Why? In the same way that our children can give us pleasure. And so what God has created the universe for is to create a home for these things to happen. The risk of creating such a world is that evil will happen in it. And it does. Right? Evil is something that people do. It's something that beings with free will do when they pursue their own ends instead of trying to elevate. That is a risk that God has chosen to run. Now, I believe that God is so good and loving that when we return to our soul self, we'll understand that even the great evil and pain that happened in this world serves a greater purpose. We'll have learned a lot from it. I mean, these lives are finite. Our souls are infinite. So no matter how much we suffer here, it's just, it's like waking up from a nightmare. Nightmares don't last that long. Right? At most, it's a whole night, but usually a nightmare is only a few minutes. Then you wake up from it. And so I think when our souls leave this place, no matter how bad this life was, it's like we'll wake up from it. And perhaps even like the worse that it was, the more we'll have learned from it. Maybe the more we suffer here, the more determined we'll be to be good and share goodness with others in that world of souls. But I think that this world is all about intensity. If in that world we live eternal lives, I mean, we're just not going to be in a hurry. Right? If you live forever, you might well just sleep past noon. Right? But here, where every day counts, where everything is so intense, where everything has such an opportunity to matter, it's an exceptionally important stage. Now, we had a great guest here on the show yesterday, Rav Dror, and he said that we don't know which actions are the most important. Maybe you're a rich guy and you donate $1 million to feed the homeless, and that's the most important action that was done on earth that day. Or maybe the mom who just sat with her daughter and learned some Torah and had a nice exchange together, maybe that was the most important thing that happened that day. We don't know. We don't know what the relative importances of these deeds are. But we do know what a good deed is. And we do know what a commandment is. And we got to do them. Right? So if you're a Jew, you have 613. And if you're a non-Jew, you've got 7 Noahide laws, which are all opportunities to do God's will. And don't think that you've been ripped off, because those 7 are categories that embody a lot of possibilities to do God's will. Starting with the first Noahide law is know about God. And that's all Torah studies. So you are doing a mitzvah right now. Irene, I see you raising your hand. You're bursting to speak. Tell me.
I'm plotzing.
You're plotzing.
I'm plotzing about the 4th commandment about Shabbos. So I was talking to somebody about this, and they were telling me that in Daf 36, Umud B, that the Mishnah says we can't climb a tree. Why? Why can't we climb a tree? Why can't we ride on an animal if we're not doing the work? We can't swim. We can't clap our hands or slap our thighs. We can't dance. And we can't play an instrument. And why is this considered work as opposed to enjoyment? Or why are these things considered, you can't do these things on Shabbos?
Okay, it's a great question. So Irene was referring to a tractate of the Talmud, which includes the Mishnah. Okay, so this is the oral tradition that I mentioned earlier that goes all the way back to Sinai. Some of the laws were given at Sinai. Many, many thousands more were sort of developed by our sages following these principles in these thousands of years since Sinai, which is about 3,300 years ago. So the Torah says, honor Shabbat, okay? And it's just a few other specific things about, don't gather wood on Shabbat, don't kindle a fire on Shabbat. And from the few principles that are overtly spelled out, our sages derive many more, including the ones that Irene has mentioned. Don't play a musical instrument is a tough one, right? Because we think, well, music would give us so much pleasure on Shabbat. And in fact, singing and clapping is a big part of Shabbat. And at synagogue, we'll even bang on the furniture to
And
sort of
you
create the sound
dance
of drums.
And in some synagogues, you dance on Shabbat.
In some synagogues, you dance on Shabbat, and maybe in all synagogues, in some synagogues, the men and women dance separately.
Right.
But why not the musical instruments? And now, what this is all of. So thank you, Irene. I thank you for that question. So our sages are saying, musical instruments are great. We'd love to have musical instruments. But because we also have a principle of put a fence around the Torah just to make sure we don't accidentally come to violate a prohibition, we have to put in safeguards, right? Like a warning track before you actually come upon a violation. And so the problem with musical instruments is that if we allow musical instruments, then people will carry the musical instruments to synagogue, or they might repair the musical instrument. You're playing a guitar, the string breaks. When you fix the string, that's considered a form of work. And what will happen here, of course, is that if you're Jewish, if you're in a Jewish community, if you know a Jew, you'll know that the Jews are in no way monolithic. There's just nothing monolithic about the Jews, and every Jewish community has sort of different customs and traditions beyond the big divisions like Reform and Conservative and Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. Every community is going to have some different traditions that are different than the one next to it. And wherever a Jew is standing, he's going to say, well, that guy over there who follows less laws, he's like not even a Jew. And this guy over here who follows more laws than me, he's crazy. But I'm in the middle. Everyone thinks they're in the middle. But really, I think what's happened is these communities that develop more and more rules, they experience those rules as a way to come close to God and to each other. If they get carried away with the rules and they're sort of suffering in their observance of Shabbat, then some would say they've gone too far and they've made a mistake. But if adding these rules helps their community to have a more loving, peace-filled Shabbat, then they're doing it right. And that balance is not easy. The balance is not easy in the sense that, it's constantly fluctuating. And so a rule that was onerous, that was made sense, at one point later becomes onerous, then the rabbis of that generation have to reevaluate, does it make sense or does it not? And it's a process. It's a process. And, every community will look at the rules of other communities and say, we would not do that. But on the big things, the fact that there is Shabbat, the fact that we're not going to drive, these days, the fact that we're not going to turn on our cell phones, everyone agrees. And these are just ways to really keep the holiness and the beauty of Shabbat. Okay. Was anyone else raising a hand over there? Wanda, did I see you moving around? Did you want to ask something? You'll let me know. Okay. All right. I see, is this Jack? I can't quite read the name, but he says, if Elohim created everything, heaven, earth, etc., including man and woman, in his image, shouldn't all souls, Jews and non-Jews, created by him, follow all 10 commandments? It's a great question. The 10 commandments were given to the Jewish people, right? These are, because you'll notice the first commandment says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, right? So if you were an Egyptian who didn't leave Egypt, you're not in that group, right? If you were at that time living in Cush or in whatever, Assyria or Sumeria, or whatever the other countries were, you were affected by the giving of the 10 commandments, but you weren't included in that covenant. Now, anyone can become a Jew. It takes a lot of work. If you're not born a Jew, it's a very difficult process. People who are thinking about becoming Jewish will encounter difficulty and resistance. It's not easy to become a Jew, and it's undertaking such a big responsibility that one needs to think very carefully about doing that. But Judaism is not like other religions in the sense that it doesn't, you don't have to be a Jew to have a role in Judaism, right? So a non-Jew is in no way doing less for the world by not following Jewish commandments. The non-Jew is doing his or her part for the world. And following, like I said, those 7 Noahide laws are big. It's not so easy to follow them. And there's a lot to do, right? I mean, one of the 7 Noahide laws is establishing courts of justice. That is not just, making sure you live in a country that has courts and judges. That's participating in a just society. That's participating in a society that values justice. So you can do that at all times and places. But in terms of the Jews, God has sort of a role for everyone. And there are people who are not Jewish, and they're not just following the Noahide commandments. Every person, Jew or non-Jew, it's not just follow the law. Every person has to figure out, what is the contribution that only I can make to the world, right? Every person has a unique set of abilities, of perspectives. There is a gift that only you can give this world. And if you don't give it, then you didn't realize your purpose here, right? So then there's a great mystery. What is my purpose? How do I know my purpose? Figuring it out is your purpose until you figure it out, right? And there are clues that we can all follow. A really beautiful one that we got from Rav Dror is, if it's not making you happy, right? If sort of figuring out where you belong in this world, if you're miserable, you're on the wrong track. God wants us to be happy. Now, it's certainly true that the best way to have real pleasure in this world is to be of service to others, right? When you find yourself in that moment of helping somebody transform their life, bringing a hungry person food, like the moment you hand over that food, it's a very rare person. Maybe there's no one in the whole world that will not feel pleasure when they give food to a hungry person, like when they give a glass of water to a thirsty person, right? Likewise, when we're, honing in on our personal mission, we will be getting more pleasure out of life. When we're miserable and anxious and lying awake at night and wondering, how am I going to get by and what am I going to do? And when there's a lot of anxiety, you're on the wrong track, right? We need to, and that's not to say that if you're anxious, you're doing something wrong. We're all anxious. But the way out of anxiety is to say, well, hold on. What I have is what I'm supposed to have. It's what I've been given. If I can imagine some way that I can give the world a lot more, where I'm going to need more resources to do that, so God, please help me have more abundance in my life, provide me with greater tools, even greater wealth, so that I can do greater good in this world, it will start to flow. It will start to flow that way, right? But it may not be about money. The resources that you need in order to give more to the world, maybe what you need more of is time. Maybe you're spending too much time on something that is not really within your unique gift to give to the world. And so starting to understand that and reprioritizing our hours and our days so that we have the time needed to do the thing that we're on earth to do, that's an important part of that mission process, right? When I look at my to-do list and I see a bunch of items that have been on that to-do list for a long time and items that I consider important, and yet I don't get to them each day, that's it. Like bang, bang, bang. That's a bright light that something's wrong. I have to really think about it. Either those items don't belong on my list, and I have to just cut bait, or other items that are on that list and which I am getting to every day shouldn't be on that list. And I've got to cut those out so that I can get to what I consider truly important. And making that heshbon, that accounting, that is a constant obligation. Accounting for our time, accounting for our use of resources so that we can give our unique gift, super important. Now, this class runs from 10 to 11. I want to be mindful of people's time. I will stay here and answer more questions. We didn't get to the second tablet. So today was about the 10 Commandments, but we covered 5. So next week, we will continue and cover Commandments 6 through 10. But if you have to go, thank you for being here and for participating in this great mitzvah. Let us know if you want to be available to help us make calls and reach out to our community in our big fundraiser on February 20th. Yes? Oh, Nina's pointing out, thank you, my beloved, that I will keep talking too long and people will stay. So I really want to be mindful of people's time. So first of all, you have to go. And I will stay for a specific amount of time to answer questions. Let's say another 10 minutes, Okay. So 11:18 here in California. All right. Who has a question? Your list is too long. Thanks, Jeff. Hillary said, thank you for this informative session. I have to leave a bit early, but I hope that you will do this more often. Amen. Every week. Okay. Yes. Okay. No problems, Dan. See you soon. Are there any more questions coming in? Let me know if you have a question. If a panelist wants to raise a hand, very good. I'm going back up to comments from earlier. Is it that we become a part of Hashem's legacy, this constantly changing chain of relationship? Yes. We're part of it, here we are learning Torah, right? So if you've learned something new today, Baruch Hashem, praise God, you learned something new. I will tell you that you haven't really learned it until you've taught it. And of course, you haven't really learned it at all because you have to keep constantly learning and teaching. And every time we go over this material, we'll learn something new. The Bible is like that. There's an ever-flowing spring. That's why we read the whole Torah every year. We came to this Torah portion this week, and we're learning new things from it. My point is, if you've learned yourself something new today from being in this class, you will learn it 10 times better when you go and teach it, right? So we have a saying that even if the only thing you know is A, like ABC, and the only thing you know is A, go teach A to someone else, and then you'll know A a lot better, right? Then when you learn A and B, go teach A and B to someone else. Jeff is saying I learn something new each time I teach it. Everyone knows, everyone who's taught anything, because you have an understanding of what you heard, but then when you have to teach it to someone else, you have to reorganize those thoughts, and then it becomes different. Okay. Karen says, thanks for the class, have a good week. And Rebecca says, thank you, you're very welcome. Warren says, what kind of situation does Aish have in Israel for Aliyah? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I read that you have a position with Aish. I'm thinking of doing Aliyah. I'm not associated with the organization Aish, which is a wonderful organization. And I went on a trip to Israel that was organized by Aish. Aish and Chabad are sort of the two really big outreach organizations in the world. And they have quite different philosophies from each other. Chabad is Hasidic. Aish is what you would call more Litvish. My name is Litvak. And the Litvak sort of has a specific meaning in Jewish history. It was the Talmudists, actually, the ones who really prized learning above everything, based in Lithuania, nearby. The seat of learning, sort of capital of learning in the Litvak world was in Vilna. And there was this sense that the more learned you were, the more respectable and important you were. And there's a beauty to that, right? For a society to really value learning and people that can teach and share Torah with others is a beautiful thing. But then along came the Hasidic world, founded by the Baal Shem Tov, to say, well, that's all well and good, but if you think that the guy who's in a yeshiva studying 15 hours a day is necessarily a holier person than the farmer who's busy working from dawn till dusk, milking his cows and putting food on the table for his family, but who does so in a simple and loving manner and has a real love of God and a desire to have God in his life, well, then you've made a mistake, because both of these creatures are God's creatures and can come equally close to God. And so the Hasidic world was all about this, just pursuing the straight relationship with God and finding joy in it. And so, and you have to understand that while there have been rivalries between the Hasidic world and the Litvish world at different times in history, in the end, they're both pursuing the same thing. They just sort of do it along different tracks. And so Aish is a kind of representative of that more Litvish track, and Chabad is that more Hasidic track. But both are learning all the time. Both are sharing Torah all the time. Both are pursuing joy in the world and joy in their Creator. They just do it a little differently. And to answer your question about making Aliyah, Aliyah means moving to Israel. And it's a beautiful thing. It's not necessarily easy, but I recommend to everybody, Jew or non-Jew, that you visit Israel. Because no matter who you are, when you land in the Holy Land, you feel it. You're in a different place. It feels holy from the first step. And you take off the plane and everywhere you go. And there's just a feeling that everyone should experience in their life. And if you've been to Israel already, go again. I'm figuring out how I can get back there soon. Okay. All right, 4 more minutes. James, are you waving your hand? I'm unmuting you. Let him speak. Unmute. You unmuted, I unmuted. You unmute yourself. No, you're still. There you go.
There we go. Of course, Sal, that I'm attempting to convert to Judaism rather late in my life, actually. I hope I can live long enough to get the job done.
Amen.
Yes. I get so confused sometimes when the 10 Commandments, of course, the Christians use the 10 Commandments. And being a crime scene investigator and a deputy coroner in my past, I'd go into churches or I'd go to a lot of places and they would have thou shalt not kill and not thou shalt not murder.
This is such a good question. This is such a good question. Not only because it's a great question in itself, but because it is the perfect transition to next week's class, which will begin with the 6th commandment. And you will find the different translations, right? Sort of straight, it is don't kill. But our sages understand that very emphatically as do not murder. It is do not murder. The prohibition is on murder. What is the difference? There are times when it is correct to kill. Okay, so if a terrorist is holding a gun to an innocent person's head and you can kill that terrorist, you did not violate any commandment. As a matter of fact, you fully fulfilled God's will because you saved an innocent life. That's the difference between killing and murdering, right? So killing is generally wrong and we want to avoid it at all costs, but there are times when it is the correct thing to do to kill. Murder, never right? Murder is the taking of innocent life, and it is evil. And what's interesting about murder, so this will be a little sneak preview of next week in the 2 minutes I've got left. Murder embodies so much more. Who needs to be told by the Holy One, by the Eternal, that we shouldn't murder? Doesn't every human know that? Isn't that just instinct? Doesn't every legal code probably begin with that? You don't murder. Every human knows that instinctively. Some people will do it because they're evil, but everyone knows that it's wrong. So why does God have to tell us? Our sages say because he's telling us a lot more than just don't take innocent life. He's telling us, just like with the prohibition on idolatry, that involves all kinds of things. Like you just won't do an action that resembles idolatry because it sort of creates and spreads disrespect to God. Likewise, we won't even do an action that resembles murder. We won't do any aspect of murder. Now, that doesn't just mean that we won't, join a conspiracy that's going to lead to a murder. It also means that we won't do actions that are tantamount to murder. And our sages teach that humiliating a person publicly is like murder. It is similar to murder. And these days, man, there's a lot of that going on. Using the public means of communication, which have never been so big. Right? It used to be that you had to be a famous, powerful person to get the ear of all people. Now, there's just ways that you can kind of seize the attention of the world and get them to pay attention. And if you seize that attention in order to humiliate another person, that is like murder. And people do it all the time. It is a terrible, terrible thing. And so part of refining our speech and living on a higher level, as we've been talking about all day, is doing anything necessary to avoid humiliating others. Right? And we're going to continue about that next week. But there's just so many ramifications of do not humiliate others. If, for example, if somebody says something wrong in a public space and you want to correct them, how can you do that in the most respectful way possible? Often that means pulling them aside and telling them later. Right? Not the public rebuke. Certainly don't embarrass people in public. There's just a lot of aspects of that. And we'll talk about that next week. My pals, it's been fantastic to share Torah with you on this Wednesday morning or afternoon or whatever time it is where you are. I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday at the same time when we will continue with the second tablet, the Commandments 6 through 10. We send you all our love.